friends, welcome back. I am Tia, your quiz master. Today's quiz is based on World's Firsts, a quiz on pioneering achievements. Keep note of your score for comments. Let's begin. Who was the first president of India? Rajendra Prasad was the first president of India, serving from 1950 to 1962. Who was the first president of Russia? Boris Yeltsin was the first president of Russia, serving from 1991 to 1999. Who was the first man to land on the moon? Neil Armstrong was the first man to set foot on the moon on July 20, 1969. Who was the first man in space? Yuri Gagarin was the first human to journey into outer space, orbiting Earth on April 12, 1961. Which was the first country to grant women the right to vote? New Zealand was the first country to grant women the right to vote in 1893. Who was the first woman to win a Nobel Prize? Marie Curie was the first woman to win a Nobel Prize in physics in 1903 and later in chemistry in 1911. Who was the first person to climb Mount Everest? Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay reached the summit of Mount Everest on May 29, 1953. Next question, which was the first country to gain independence in the 20th century? Finland declared independence from Russia on December 6, 1917. Who was the first female prime minister in the world? Sirimavo Bandaranaike of Sri Lanka became the world's first female prime minister in 1960. Next question, what was the first satellite in space? Sputnik 1, launched by the USSR on October 4, 1957, was the first artificial Earth satellite. Which was the first country to legalize same-sex marriage? The Netherlands became the first country to legalize same-sex marriage on April 1, 2001. Next question, who was the first person to reach the South Pole? Roald Amundsen reached the South Pole on December 14, 1911. Next question, who was the first person to sail solo around the world? Joshua Slocum completed his solo circumnavigation of the globe between 1895 and 1898. Who was the first recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize? Henri Dunant, founder of the Red Cross, received the first Nobel Peace Prize in 1901. Next question, which was the first country to host the modern Olympic Games? The first modern Olympic Games were held in Athens, Greece, in 1896. What was the first animal in space? Laika, a Soviet space dog, was the first animal to orbit the Earth in 1957. Next question, who was the first person to receive a heart transplant? Louis Washkansky received the first human heart transplant performed by Dr. Christian Barnard in 1967. Which was the first country to use paper money? Paper money was first developed in China during the Tang Dynasty, 618 to 907 AD. Next question, who was the first president of the United States? George Washington was the first president of the United States, serving from 1789 to 1797. Next question, which was the first African country to gain independence? Ghana gained independence from Britain on March 6, 1957. Who was the first artificial heart recipient? Barney Clark received the first permanent artificial heart implant in 1982. Next question, what was the first human-made object to reach space? The V-2 rocket, developed by Nazi Germany, was the first human-made object to reach the edge of space in 1944. Which was the first country to abolish slavery? Haiti declared independence from France and abolished slavery in 1804. Who was the first female astronaut? Valentina Tereshkova of the USSR became the first woman in space in 1963. Next question, who was the first person to break the sound barrier? Chuck Yeager broke the sound barrier in a Bell X-1 aircraft on October 14, 1947. What was the first successful vaccine? The smallpox vaccine, developed by Edward Jenner in 1796, was the first successful vaccine. Which was the first city to host the Winter Olympics? The first Winter Olympics were held in Chamonix, France, in 1924. Next question, what was the first cloned animal? Dolly the sheep, cloned in 1996, was the first mammal cloned from an adult somatic cell. Who was the first recipient of the Victoria Cross? Charles Davis Lucas was awarded the first Victoria Cross for bravery in 1857. Who was the first Secretary General of the United Nations? Trygve Lie of Norway served as the first Secretary General of the United Nations from 1946 to 1952. Next question, which was the first spacecraft to land on Mars? Viking 1 was the first spacecraft to land successfully on Mars, on July 20, 1976. Next question, who was the first female Nobel laureate in literature? Selma Lagerlöf was the first woman to win the Nobel Prize in Literature, in 1909. Next question, which was the first country to host the FIFA World Cup? Uruguay hosted the first FIFA World Cup in 1930 and also won the tournament. Who was the first person to reach the North Pole? Robert Peary claimed to have reached the North Pole on April 6, 1909. What was the first artificial satellite to orbit the Moon? Luna 1, launched by the Soviet Union in 1959, was the first spacecraft to reach the vicinity of the Moon. Next question, who was the first African American President of the United States? Barack Obama became the first African American President of the United States, serving from 2009 to 2017. Which was the first country to adopt a national flag? The flag of Denmark, known as the Dannebrog, is the oldest national flag still in use, adopted in 1219. Who was the first recipient of the Nobel Prize in Physics? Wilhelm Röntgen was awarded the first Nobel Prize in Physics in 1901 for his discovery of X-rays. Next question, which was the first country to have a female head of state? Sirimavo Bandaranaike of Sri Lanka became the world's first female head of state in 1960. What was the first human organ to be successfully transplanted? The first successful human organ transplant was a kidney transplant performed by Dr. Joseph Murray in 1954. Who was the first person to win 2 Nobel Prizes? Marie Curie was the first person to win 2 Nobel Prizes, in physics, 1903, and chemistry, 1911. Next question, who was the first female chancellor of Germany? Angela Merkel became the first female chancellor of Germany, serving from 2005 to 2021. Next question, which was the first university in the world? Al-Qarawiyyan University, founded in 859 AD in Morocco, is considered the world's oldest continuously operating degree-granting university. Who was the first actor to win an Academy Award? Emil Jannings won the first Academy Award for Best Actor in 1929. Next question, who was the first Secretary of the Treasury of the United States? Alexander Hamilton was the first Secretary of the Treasury of the United States, serving from 1789 to 1795. Which was the first country to launch an artificial satellite? The Soviet Union launched the first artificial satellite, Sputnik 1, on October 4, 1957. Next question, who was the first woman to receive the Nobel Peace Prize? Bertha von Suttner was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1905. Which was the first country to establish a public library? The first public library in the United States was established in Peterborough, New Hampshire, in 1833. Who was the first female pilot to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean? Amelia Earhart became the first female pilot to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean in 1932. And the last question is, who was the first Secretary General of NATO? Lord Ismay served as the first Secretary General of NATO from 1952 to 1957. That's all for today.
Playing quizzes makes you smarter. Please comment your score and feedback for us to improve and create more learning content like this. Please like, share and subscribe. Let's picnic.